We'll head right in. Hey, folks, I'm Camberley Bates. I'm with Evaluator Group, and I have my Evaluator Group misspelled there. Isn't that wonderful? Okay. Didn't even see that yesterday. I have with me today Randy Kerns, who is our Senior Strategist with Evaluator Group, and Janae Stow, who is our Consulting Analyst with our company. If you don't know us, we are an analyst firm based out of Colorado. We work with both end users and vendors. Some of our end user clients are big, well-known names. If you went up to our website, you'd find those names up there. And those are the folks that we do consulting with. And Randy is our primary person that works with the IT end users. And what we wanted to do today was talk about some of the perspectives that we're getting from these large Fortune 500 companies. So with that, I'm going to kick this off. One of the things that we saw last year when we did our research on the hybrid cloud is that about 68% of the people have in our enterprise companies, those companies that are over 1,000 employees, et cetera, are going into production with containers. They're either already in production or they're about ready to go. And so in this session, what we're going to do is talk about the challenges and the decisions that were being made and why. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and we're going to go through a little bit of memory lane, and then we'll come up to current time. Back in 2020, Randy, you started getting inquiries from our clients. And those were for the most part IT infrastructure people and the data people, not DevOps. They were looking for some help on some decisions they were making and around containers. And usually we're taking, calls on ransomware and data protection and data storage and big, huge, AI systems where you've got data lakes and that kind of thing. But they were calling us about this. What were the issues they were facing at the time?
Well, you could summarize it in saying, for the most part, what is this? But they got surprised. A lot of the applications were coming in from their development team were container-based, and they required a different operational environment. And the development teams had set up their own specific environment. And in most cases, they were very much a erect or set type of thing, required the developer to install, maintain, update, and operate those environments. And so that wouldn't scale for the IT people. So the conversations that they ask about is saying, okay, we understand this is part of the bigger picture IT transformation strategy, and the fact we're going to have to deal with containers, but what's the right answer here? Many of them had been gone down a path at one point, were even trying OpenStack, and that had not worked well for most of them, or had been oversold to a great extent. And so they were very wary of jumping in on something, but yet they had to do something. And so it's all about what should they be doing as things go forward, as they expect to scale very large with the number of applications and the container-based applications that were driving that.
Great, thank you. And so then let's kind of fast forward to this last year, 2021, when Janae came on board to start looking at the container management platforms, aka Tanzu, Redshift, OpenShift, and SUSE Rancher, those kind of guys. And Janae, the first thing that you did was tap into your entire network of IT executives and executive vendor people that you know, well known in the industry, as you are. And what did they come back to tell you? What did they have to say?
Well, essentially, the sum of it was, we wish we didn't have to do this, but we absolutely do.
And that came from the enterprise executives. Okay.
Exactly. Particularly the enterprise executives who would be charged with making the move to container managed platforms and microservices architecture. And the challenge is that this is not an easy migration. It is probably the most sizable investment and the most disruptive change that they've had to make, for those who are old enough, since moving applications off the mainframe. And so it's not a change that they looked forward to, but they had come to realize that it was a migration that they absolutely need to make, because the benefits when you get there are so great. and the risk of the business risk if you don't make the move is so high. And the way that was described to me was, and by some very large, very well-heeled companies in our industry, was that, they see that they have new competitors who come to this party with a blank sheet of paper, who can very rapidly bring up the new architecture and then rapidly innovate in the same spaces where they have historically sold, and they can't keep up. And so they see that they absolutely need to move to microservices architecture for innovation, and they absolutely need to move to containers to be able to make the microservices architecture applications work. So.
I think let me amplify on that for a second. You look at it and say, is the motivation for these people saying, well, the developers are developing in containers, so we have to do that? Well, certainly that's true, and that may be the superficial or the first answer you get. But this has got a senior executive view saying this is competitive. Yeah. We have to do this to remain competitive or to get competitive in the environment. So the justification then goes all the way to the top.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I've seen that. I mean, I personally hear it when I go home every day, because my husband is on a regular basis, they're pushing out the next set of code for a very large national trucking firm. And
and when you think about it, absolutely. When you think about it, I mean, my own personal example, I had at one time was responsible for a very large, many million line of code file system. And, we could make a development change that took maybe a couple of weeks, and it would still take us 9 months to push out the release, because by the time you ran through the rest of the development cycle, unit test, system test, early release, et cetera, it was 9 months to release any new functionality at all. And that clearly doesn't work in the new agile environment. It doesn't support innovation. You've got to be able to push out new releases constantly. And the only way to do that in a productive way is with microservices and then an underlying container architecture.
Right, and that's where you get into, it's key to the CI/CD development methodology now.
Yeah.
And I think people that are watching this already know that, but it's kind of as a good reminder to say that the executives are catching up with where they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the message is if you're not moving down the path that you really should be, you cannot, that we've reached a point where you can no longer wait.
So now we are 12, 18 months past those initial discussions. Where are we now? What is the kind of like the world look like in these guys? They're saying, okay, I got to go. We're going. This is the state of the union here on my floor.
So I think that where we are is that people started with test benches and sandboxes and individual efforts and putting it together yourself, as you described in DevOps. And then there were some larger proofs of concept, which were a collaboration between development, operations, platform engineering, and everyone. And now what we've got is, it's the same old story. We always end up with islands of automation. We now have islands of containerization. And in each case, people selected a management platform that worked for what they were trying to do. But now the operations, platform engineering, and security side of the house is looking at this saying, this doesn't work because it's not governable, it's not secure, it's not controllable. I need to establish a standard for all of these deployments. And maybe that doesn't mean a single solution, but it means I have to be thoughtful about selecting a package of container management system that can work for everyone to the greatest extent possible, so that I can manage it, so that we keep it, so that it maintains itself, so that it's secure, and so that I can govern what's going on. And so what I found then was that people wanted to know, what should we be looking for in that container management system standard that we're going to set?
One of the big fears is that they go down the wrong path, or they get somewhere and they just can't scale larger. They can't introduce new things. And so there's a real fear that they'll get on ride the wrong pony here.
Right.
And so that's why this analysis is so important.
Yeah. And I should say, by the way, that The main issue that these customers are all having are not computer system issues. They're human issues. They're the inability to find talent. It's the same talent that the major cloud service providers are hiring to drive cloud native. And so they're competing with very large companies that have very nice career paths for development. They need to, again, develop new processes and culture, just as when we put networking and storage together, just as when we put networking, storage, and processing together. Now we're putting applications together with that all in the same boat. Do you do that with tiger teams? Do you do that with a new organization? They're working their way through all of that. What that means then is, from a platform perspective, they need to establish that container management system so that they can kind of package that away to not worry about it, so they can spend their time and attention on these human issues that really matter. Do you see that as well, Randy?
Absolutely. And
yeah,
they want something, it's terrible to say, they want something more turnkey.
Yeah.
And Janae can probably talk about, but that turnkey isn't there yet.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's spread all over the place. And I think what we found, and that's kind of going into the next thing, we are about to launch our container management platform coverage, and that is platforms or services. It's both a managed service as well as your self-managed kind of environment that we looked at. So maybe give me one of the key takeaways. I mean, I think you already touched on one of them, Janae, is the people issues. This is a real big people issue. What is another takeaway you have for, in terms of when you looked at the scope of this marketplace, of the offerings that are out there? What did you kind of find?
So I think there's a couple of early things that customers can look at to help with driving down a decision cycle. The first is to decide, do I want to adopt a managed service, as you said, or do I want to adopt a self-managed platform? And along with that, whichever one of those I select, do I want to have the flexibility to change my mind at some later point in time without a huge investment in either, a huge capital investment or an investment in new talent and skills? So, figuring out where do I want to start, and then thinking about what my longer term issues might be is one thing that you need to think about. Then the second thing is that the offerings that are available, one more point on the platforms versus services, many of the providers in this space offer both a platform and a service, but very few of those have the same features, benefits in those two offerings. So if you look at a vendor's service offering, you will not necessarily find the same features or maturity in their platform offering. And in general, the service offerings, by the way, are more mature because this whole thing got started from the cloud service side with Google and Azure and Amazon driving some of the train. So so you just because you decide, okay, I have a very trusted vendor relationship with XYZ vendor, they have a platform and a service, it doesn't matter which one I pick. Yes, it still does. You need to think about where are you going to go long term as well as short term. And then the other thing I would say is that there are some common pieces in all these offerings. And so understanding where you're going in terms of what's important to you now and in the future is also important from that perspective. So there are basic offerings that will support cluster at a time management. And then there are advanced offerings that offer many clusters management from a single pane of glass, and understanding for each vendor, how do those advanced offerings plug into the core? In some cases, it's the same product. In other cases, it's an add-on to the product. And you just need to think about, what is my scale out plan going to be? These are not necessarily new issues to any decision that enterprises have to make, but so it's kind of like, well, those are the same things I always worry about, right? But you're thinking about them in terms of scaling the management system as opposed to scaling volumes of data or scaling, the usual things we worry about.
So Randy, you've been involved with some tenders or RFPs in this area. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've seen with those, that when you've advised some of the clients.
Well, there's let me bring up a couple other dynamics here. rarely do people get a complete clean sheet of paper on this. That's what, unfortunately, most of us tend to talk about when it comes to containers, because it is so new, so different, and everything. So one of the big things from customers is they talk about, Janae brought up the personnel issue, which is absolutely true, but they also are saying, I've got to insert this into my existing environment, my operational environment I have today. And creating a brand new operational environment is not only difficult, it's risky, in that you can do things that may not be done correctly, have problems, may have recovery issues after disasters. The business continuity factors have to come into play. And so bringing this new in, the biggest things they talk about is, how do I make this work in my existing environment? What most do is they look at it and start up somewhat independently. And I think Janae talked about POCs and stuff. I actually move it beyond POC, and they put in what we used to call a pilot program. And a pilot program puts this into place and saying, this is what I'm going to start with. I know I'm going to grow it. And they'll start that relatively modestly and independently. But at some point, they'd like to see how to combine the two environments. Many of them are virtual machine-based operations, and it's somewhat of an anathema to the way it works with the containers and the designs there. And so they don't necessarily see a direction where it's not handled as an exception. We just don't have good answers. So the questions come in, how can I do this? And right now there just aren't any good answers.
And that's one of the things that we looked at as we were going through and looking at some rankings that we have. We will be publishing who's the top dogs in certain areas with the research that we're putting out. And in there, we found that, or you found, I didn't find, Janae and Randy working on this stuff, is that as with typical all technologies, one size does not fit all. And so we ended up having to slice the data a couple more ways and start looking at business drivers. And one of those business drivers was something called container forward decision. Janae, can you comment on that? And then I'm going to go to Randy on the other one.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you said, what we discovered is that as customers prioritize their requirements, we asked them what are the key things they needed in a solution, and those core criteria were pretty common, and no one would be very surprised by them. They were, 10 or in some cases 11 criteria that people said, these are the things I'm going to look at. But they put very different weightings on different criteria depending on what their other biggest business problem was at the time they're making the decision. So, as we've been talking about, one of those core issues is, and Randy mentioned this, is, how does this merge into what I already have today? And if someone had a very strong need to continue to provide very high quality of service for their virtual machine environment, they had a different view of what they needed their container management system to have in it than if they were getting huge pressure from upper management on this digital innovation front, and they really need to innovate as quickly as possible. And then, of course, we had people also who were trying to, while doing container migration, who were trying to rapidly innovate a new customer experience on top of a major application on their data platform. And that developed a separate set of weightings. And so the one where the customer was getting driven the fastest toward innovation ended up being this one we call customer or container forward. They need to get to a container microservices architecture as quickly as possible in order to address the demands of the business. And so they tend to weight more heavily in that pure container model of really being able to scale in a very manageable way, of having a very integrated offering that integrates the microservices development tools in very well. In some cases, the ability to also integrate prepackaged offerings from the container management vendor around being able to bring in stateful applications as an example. And they were very focused on scaling out security and governance features. So those were very heavy criteria for these container forward people who were worried about, how do I get to containers as quickly as possible while still managing to separately manage my virtual machine environment.
So I'm going to shift topics. This is kind of our last topical area, probably our last major question here. Randy, with this containers, data management changes, that could be an entirely another half an hour discussion or longer than that. How do the information management people shift and change to adopt to this new world?
Boy, that's if we knew that one, we would make a lot of money.
Yeah. Good question.
No, it's really been interesting to watch this develop in certain companies. A lot of companies tried to equate their use of a backup catalog to be data management, and that's one starting point, but it's not sufficient. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing right now. As we start to see people understand that it's not your everyday backup like we had before, because the container environments are quite a bit different. And there's all these other things to be able to achieve the same state of operation when you recover data, because you have to save things like secrets files and configurations and know what other microservices and containers are in operation. It's just a lot more to do. So once they achieve that, then I think they'll get around to addressing the data management part of that. And right now, I don't think anybody's effectively even discussed how to get there. I think you're going to see the backup people go after it from the standpoint of, hey, I've got the catalog, that's all you need. Whereas it's a lot more than that. And it's an opportunity for some independent companies now to start to look at this and say, what's the big picture? And it's not limited just to file systems, which a lot of them only seem to focus on, even though that's the majority of the data. It's a lot more complicated than that. So I don't think we've scratched the surface on what it's going to mean for data management in a container world yet.
Yeah, it's going to be a long haul. This is, as we've talked about, this is a very slow moving technology, because it's getting moving from one, it's a development cycle, right? It's not.
There's great opportunities here.
Yes.
Great opportunities. And one of the interesting things talking about it with a lot of the end user clients is, remember I made a comment about a clean sheet of paper. Most of them actually look at their deployment, their initial real deployment, if you will, not something adopted from a development group, are going to be new purchases. And so people selling hardware and software, this is all new sales. And it doesn't displace existing sales. So it's huge opportunity. So vendor companies are going to be really focused on this from an economic standpoint. The issue is, from a customer standpoint, they need to understand what the customer needs are. And that's the thing Janae's been focusing on, trying to figure out what's really necessary here, and then provide the right solutions for them, not just the same old stuff that we've had before.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you guys. And I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to put one plug in. We have coming up in June, 13th through the 15th. If you want to come to Colorado, we have our two and a half day class. And this is a snippet of what you might get. And we will be talking in depth about all the products around in the container world, both data protection, data storage, container management platforms, converged systems, you name it, it's going to be in there. We'd love to have you. If you want to see anything about that, just go up to evaluatorgroup.com, and there's information on education and that kind of stuff up there. We'd love to see you here. Thank you.